Hey, folks, welcome to the program. We have the State Director for Americans for Prosperity, Arkansas. We got Mr. Ryan Norris is with us. Ryan, how are you this morning?
Man, I'm doing exceptionally well. We just had a great day of remembrance with our family for the Memorial Day. You know, remembering all the people who gave the ultimate sacrifice so that we could have conversations like this one, Paul.
Absolutely. It was a good weekend as well, and I really loved the tributes. Some of the videos that people had posted, on Twitter's is one that I'm thinking of that really just put highlights what the sacrifice does to the families of these.
Yes.
That's to me is what is just so devastating. Maybe it's because I haven't been a dad for too long. 2 years, I guess, in July, and it just kind of wrecks you on the inside. And so it really puts into a completely different context for me what really these families go through once their loved one gives up the ultimate sacrifice. So Ryan, I wanted to have you on because I know Americans for Prosperity Arkansas, I know you guys are focused on policy, economic freedom issues here in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you were monitoring what was going on in the 92nd General Assembly here in Arkansas. So I wanted to, Ryan Norris from Americans for Prosperity Arkansas, what was your impression of the session 2019?
Well, it was kind of a, as every session is, kind of a mixed bag in a way. If session would have ended about 2 weeks in and everybody would have been able to go home, I think I would have had a much better session than how it ended up towards the end there. But there were some positive things, and so I like to focus on that at the moment. We did bring down the top marginal rate with that Senate Bill 211. That was great. There were some other bills out there that I think were very helpful in bringing down some corporate taxes, doing the carry forwards, those kind of things. But then, of course, you get into the highway funding, which was kind of the theme, I guess, of this session. I mean, that was where we were all going. They were trying to get the good stuff out of the way first, so that then they could come around the back end and increase our gas taxes, and then put the come over the ballot question for us in 2020. So
the half-cent sales tax.
Half-cent sales tax, yeah. So all of this said and done, I'm not quite convinced that it was a net positive for the taxpayer. I'm seeing by my numbers that, for the foreseeable future, we're still paying a little more out of pocket for our government than previous to the session. I would like to see that changed. I think there are some things that have been put in place that may help to bring down the size and the cost of government over time. But in general, if there's a problem in Arkansas, we're going to try to find a tax for it first and then reforms for it later. And we kind of need to reverse that. We need to try to do the reforms first. I think that's the one of the first places that you go to as a family when you're looking at your budget is you look through the budget for the things that you can save and the cost savings and the things that you can cut before you immediately turn around and say, well, man, I need to increase my revenues on this. Mm-hmm. And I've just always been kind of the pitch is always made more to the interests that are in the room when it comes to these changes, specifically around taxes, and it's less towards the people. I would like to see the argument well laid out, the campaign well laid out to the people first before we go through and say, okay, well, we need another $300 million worth of annual revenue for our roads per se. Mm-hmm. It just seems like the people are the how it's going to impact the average Arkansan is kind of the last thing they think of.
Yeah, I think you're right. What you're describing is that I'm really glad that you're focusing on this. Like there needs to be a mentality shift away from like you say, looking at taxes every single time to solve the problem. So long term, Ryan, and I appreciate your thoughts on that because those are some of I share your concerns. Long term, if you can't combat the mentality, let's say, is it going to take is it going to take 100% Republicans in the Senate or 100% Republicans in the House? I don't necessarily know if you could ever get there, and I don't even think if you did, you still have this mentality issue. So how do you shift it? Is there a way to use the law or to actually come up with a policy that's crafted in statute that would prevent the growth of government that we're seeing in Arkansas?
Yes, there is. There definitely is, but such as I think we've had conversations about this before about I don't want to say necessarily model legislation because I'm not a big fan of model legislation because each state's kind of different, but the principles behind legislation such as the Taxpayer Bill of Rights model I think is interesting, which is, for those that don't know what that formula is, it basically marks a 0 year for a state budget and state revenue, and then it says the budget can only increase by the percentage of population growth plus inflation. So if it's 2% inflation, 2% population growth, you can only grow the government budget by 4% the next budget cycle. What I like about that in principle is the idea that there is consistency, that there is some controls that the people can depend on, that their government's not going to grow beyond that point, unless you can always put in there's some kind of catastrophic emergency, et cetera, et cetera. But what I found out, Paul, from my time under the dome, is it shocked me how many people would be for certain taxes. And what you find out is that everybody that's sitting at the table knows that sooner or later their industry, their sector of the economy, is going to be in the hot seat. It's inevitable. You're going to be in the hot seat, and they're going to increase the taxes on your industry or whatever that may be. So what they do is they are all band together and basically say, "Hey, well, at least it's not me this time. I know it's coming, so I'm going to support this tax increase," because basically all of them, as I pointed out on the highway taxes, this gets passed on to the consumer. The industry only it's not like a magic cash register in a business. It doesn't automatically push a button and money magically appears. It comes from the pockets of people who are buying goods and services from you, which means that they can either buy less, they will end up buying less goods and services if those taxes go. And so we really need to struggle with that question before we decide taxing is the only way. It needs to be proven that it's the only way to the people before we go down that road. But yes, there is legislation such as Tabor out there that maybe Arkansas could model off of, take pieces of, that help add consistency to our revenue and to our budgeting structures. Because right now, there's no top end. We have the Revenue Stabilization Act, but that only says that we can't spend more than we take in. That doesn't keep us from taking in as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, and then spending it. That's the thing is the RSA is good, but it's bad because it just means that everything they take in extra is gonna get funded because they have that ABC category. We're talking with Ryan Norris. He's the director of Americans for Prosperity Arkansas. He's giving his impression of the session for the 92nd General Assembly. Now, you actually, am I correct in stating that Americans for Prosperity, you guys were against the raising of the gas tax at the wholesale level for gas and diesel, and did you actually speak on that in committee? Yes,
I did. It was my lonely self versus the world. It was very I wouldn't even say Pyrrhic victory. I got wiped out because you're looking at all the interests that are standing up there that are very powerful lobbies. And Americans for Prosperity, we want to be the voice of the people. That's kind of a broad statement, I guess. But what I try to do is I put myself into thinking of, okay, so you increase gas taxes. That means less money for particularly those that are on fixed income. They don't get an opportunity if you're on Social Security to go out and and necessarily improve your revenue stream or something along those lines. They may be beyond their workable years or have other things that they that keep them from gaining some employment. And so I try to sit at the table and say, listen, have you thought this through all the way? For example, why do we need to, in the 2019 session, go ahead and pass this saying we need the ballot question when we still have another session between now and when this tax sunsets? With all these tax decreases that they've been telling us about, like SB 211, the lower the top rates, the cut to the middle class, cut to the lower class, all these wonderful things that say that Arkansas has a vibrant economy. Trust that. Let's take a couple of years, see what the economic outcome is for all these positive reforms, and then we may find out we don't need to raise the $300 million in additional taxes. We may have it by natural growth of an economy that's working for everybody.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
They should. That's what I made the argument for. Of course, it didn't go anywhere.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, we've already seen evidence that you're correct. So let's just say that right now. You are correct, Ryan Norris, because we already saw that in April. They had over $100 million that they didn't have. They didn't think they were going to have. It was over projections. And
right.
That right there, it would have paid for the $95 million in wholesale. If we're talking about the situation with the half-cent sales tax that's set to sunset, I think that you're right. I don't understand, with a session in between, why you wouldn't wait and see how things are going.
Right.
It just gets to a point where the people only have a finite amount of resources, and I actually think, and I talked about this a little bit when it happened. I'm not so sure that they didn't need 75% of both chambers to even pass that gas tax increase. Now, that's a whole nother argument, but I think that there was, they're taxing a product twice, Ryan. We already pay at the pump, and then they tax it at the wholesale level.
Yeah, I see that argument. I don't disagree with you, Paul, on that. I think that just every tax needs a 75%, and trying to find a loophole around it is, again, I point to as evidence that they're not thinking about the people. It's how do we get this accomplished? They think that if the people aren't wanting it, then they don't want it. And so trying to do a workaround is not the way that I think principled governance should happen. Mm. And we see this happen all the time. You go and you see people vote something down maybe at a local level, but then the local government will turn around and try to find another backdoor way of funding whatever project they want in the first place. Government has seemingly lost its sense of accountability to the people that it represents. And every good idea is the best idea ever and should be funded every single time. That's what I think Arkansas culturally we have got to get back to. The elected official is a public servant. They are supposed to do the will of the people. Trying to do, special elections that have lower voter turnout so that that you can get those, get your idea passed and funded. That happens all the time. Of course, it's getting to be rare. This year we've seen several of those local taxes get voted down overwhelmingly.
Yes.
And I think the people are starting to recognize that. So I think that the people that are interested in this and getting their government back need to start taking active steps to participate in an organized way with those they agree with and are aligned with to help take this government back to where it's not just what happens under the dome in Little Rock is what decides what happens to the rest of the state. It needs to be the people engaged.
There was one more issue. I know we're running out of time. We're talking with State Director for Americans for Prosperity Arkansas, Ryan Norris. There was an issue that was voted down that I think was a good thing that it was voted down, and it would have required the disclosure of donors, to nonprofits. Now, this was a terrible idea, but it seemed like there were people, Ryan, that thought that privacy wasn't something that private groups should enjoy, I guess. What were your thoughts on that and how it went down?
Yeah, so the House bill that went through was to basically expand the definition of what the term is eluding me right now, but basically your C3, C4 operations. It expands what a ballot question committee would be, or a
independent expenditure.
Yes, independent expenditure. Yes, independent expenditure, and basically setting up structure to where if anyone donated to those organizations, and it could be that you donate to, say, we were at the table fighting against this with Rose Mims from Arkansas Right to Life. That anyone who donated, if you had an opinion about a judicial candidate, that you could potentially have to disclose that information of who your donors are from your organization to the Secretary of State's office. And so it was expanding that. And many people are like, well, we want to know who donated. Well, let's get this straight. The reason that was stated for doing this was to freeze free speech. It was to be able to drag people who have private opinions and want to support causes in a private way, to drag them into the public square and be able to say, hey, look at what you did, and we're against you, and we're going to do, now that we know where you're at and who you work for, because you had to put your name, who your employers were, all these kind of things. We fought very much against it because we are First Amendment all the way as an organization. We even had organizations like the ACLU came to give us their support and said, hey, yes, we don't know if showing up at the table may be helpful to your cause, but we agree with you on this, that yes, privacy is for citizens, transparency is for government.
Yes.
And whenever you start seeing that shifting, you need to raise up no matter where it's at and squash that as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of individuals who did stand up on that, and I really do applaud Arkansas Right to Life and Ms. Rose Mims for helping with that issue.
Yeah, I do too, and it really goes to show you, how much of a sway that organization certainly has, because they were like, hey, wait a second, we don't, if we have an opinion on a judicial candidate and convey that in any way, well, all of a sudden we have to give up our donors. And in this society, Ryan, of how radical the left can be in doxing people and mobbing them and getting them fired, I mean that's reprisals, political reprisals, pulling your business license or threatening to do. I mean, all of these things can happen, and so it's good. I agree with what you say. Privacy is for citizens, transparency is for government. Ryan Norris, it's always great to talk to you, sir. I appreciate the work you're doing at Americans for Prosperity Arkansas, and I'd love to have you on anytime, sir.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Paul. We enjoy speaking with you and letting everybody know what we're up to.
All righty. Ryan Norris, everybody. We're going to take a break. Going to reset here.